Hello and welcome to heaven2earth.com. It's me, Gunnar. I'm joined by a very special guest today, Mr. Andrew Collins. How are you, Andrew?
Yes,
looking dapper in the desert today.
Thank you very much, sir.
What are you doing here, my friend?
I'm here to talk about an alien megastructure, so-called, that's been discovered around a star called KIC 8462852.
I love how you know the name. I tend to call it Steve, but it's commonly known as Tabby Star, isn't it?
It is. It's known as Tabby Star or Boyajian Star, after the astronomer who first wrote about the subject in 2015, whose name is Tabitha Boyajian.
Yes.
And essentially, she suggested back then that that something was going in front of this star. It was something which was being recorded by the Kepler Space Telescope.
Now, the Kepler Space Telescope looks at the dimming of stars. And
it does.
And this is how it works out the transits of, let's say, planets that go in front of it.
Yeah.
Now, this thing has been, what, dimming consistently for about 100 years, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. But what was noticed before they realised the dimming was that periodically it was dipping its so-called flux or light by anything between 17 and 22%. Now this is completely unknown and a mysterious because the star itself is what they call a main sequence star. It's a normal star, right. A little bit like our sun, yeah. And they shouldn't be doing this. There should be nothing getting in the way of it. You know, anything like planetary debris. You know, if it was a young star, a load of stuff would be going around, coalescing and becoming new planets. Well, it's too old for that, so it's not that. So it's not a protoplanetary disk we're looking at then? No, it's not. And the other important thing is that if a planet does go in front of a star and you're observing this transit, as they call it, or this dip in flux, it would only go down a maximum, if it was something like a Jupiter star, you know, size planet, it would only go down by about a maximum of 1%. Wow. And then it'd go back up again once the transit had passed as well? It does go back up, indeed. But of course, it's the recognition of these light flux dips that tell us that the planets are there. But this is 17% on one occasion, then again 22%. But this all happened in 2011 and 2013. And by the time they'd worked out that something really special was going around there, the Kepler mission had finished, or the first phase. You know, the telescope was facing another direction now, so they couldn't go back because they started to realise there was a periodicity, some kind of cycle in what was going on, and that it was there in 2011, 2013. What was going to happen in 2015? But it was too late. They couldn't look. It was just too late for them. So they've been waiting for now, because they predicted that something else would happen around now, that this weekend at Contact in the Desert. So it's happening right now. And sure enough, on cue, yes, the light starts to dip and it's shooting down. As I speak to you now, it had reached 3% and it was dropping so fast that it's quite clear that it's going to go down to 10%, maybe even 20% within the next few days. So whatever it is happening again. And that's really exciting, and the reason I say that is because although there are some natural explanations for this, I mean, it's been suggested it's a swarm of comets, it's a planet a star that's eaten a planet and just burping, and it's just sort of going back to normal. Lots of other weird things, something just getting in the way between here and the star. All of these theories will be thrown out once we get more information. And the grooviest, coolest solution is that this is an alien megastructure. Wow. And of course, you've got to then say, what is a megastructure? So, I mean, let's say we're talking about the Kardashev scale here, isn't it? Yes. And a Type 1 civilization would have a control over all of its energy on its planet, all of its resources on the planet. But a Type 2 civilization would harness the power within the solar system, or particularly the star. So there's this idea of a Dyson sphere, isn't there? Yes, basically, that it's collecting energy from around the sun, and this is what could lead to this dimming, this pronounced and very strong dimming. And adding into this is the fact that, as you mentioned earlier, that a astronomer by the name of Bradley Schaefer looked at photographs of that area of the sky that have been recorded every year over the last 110 years. He examined this star very, very closely and realised that it was consistently dimming and had dimmed for, I can't remember exactly how much it was, but it's sort of more than 10%. And that, you know, this was between something like 1890 and about 1989, I believe. And then that particular series stopped. But then two other astronomers thought, well, hold on, shouldn't we be able to use the Kepler data to see if that same trend continued during the time that Kepler was looking in that area of sky? Sure enough, these astronomers, was it Ben Montet and Joshua Simon, found that the star was dimmed across that period of about 4 years by 3%. That's an extra 3% to the other dimming that had taken place. At this rate, give it a few hundred years, that star's not going to be there. So what the hell is happening up there?
Because this is what gets me, and I postulated this on the radio show that I do. Are we witnessing something that we've never seen a star do before? Is it going through its final phases? Is it fluctuating in terms of the light that it's emitting? Or are we dealing with something much more mystical, much more strange in terms of its megastructure?
Everything that we've seen so far is to do with visible light. And it's something that can be shown on graphs and spectrograms and things like that. The problem is that, firstly, none of the so-called spectra, which is the pictures that have been taken of Tabby's star during the period of activity, suggest that there are large amounts of what they call infrared excess coming from it. Now, the importance of that is that if you do something and a lot of energy is going on, and maybe you're drawing off this power from you know, no matter how much you contain it, and I mean, in many ways you could perceive it as like a solar panel. A solar panel draws in the energy of the sun, it stores it, you can then channel it away as electricity. A megastructure ultimately is one of these, but on a massive scale. But you can't contain all of that heat. Some of it will be radiated out as on the infrared radar, just like a thermal camera. You use a thermal camera, you say, oh look, red means it's hot. Same thing, but on a bigger scale. They can't see that yet. And that's not because it's not necessarily there, but they just haven't had enough time to train the correct telescopes in that direction when something is actually happening. But it's more than this, because you know, what happens if you visually look at it? You know, in other words, just through a telescope. I mean, you can blow up, you can see that star, and you see what they call the spectra. The spectra will be in different colours. That means just the pretty colours that come from it, ultimately. This will tell you whether there's an infrared excess. It will tell you whether there are other things happening on other frequencies. If there is no spectra, it's just plainly white, as it were, that means that something's very cold and maybe solid, you know, so that's what's happening at the moment. And as we speak here now, Scientific American, just its latest press release today, says that half of the big telescopes in the world are looking at this star now, this moment. And that's so credible, I think. You know, I mean, you've got SETI looking at it, you've got all these big, huge arrays in you know, all the way around the world. You've got visual observation, you've got X-ray platforms, you know, that have all been turned towards it to look at the X-ray excess coming from it. This is a big news story.
Huge news story.
And most people here don't know about it, and this is our best chance. And more than this, just this week, the BBC, the conservative BBC in the UK, put on a documentary that was essentially all about this star and said it's our best opportunity to confirm the existence of alien civilizations. So why aren't more people talking about this?
Absolutely. Well, I'm glad you're here to talk to us today about it. So I'm guessing with all of these telescopes that are pointing at this star at this moment, we could probably begin to rule in or out whether it's a fluctuation in the star's energy or whether it's actually something much more strange, like say an alien megastructure, couldn't we?
Indeed, yeah. And I mean, you know, even if it is alien, there's going to be different possibilities of what's going on up there. I mean, clearly we're looking at it from a very sort of terracentric material point of view. You know, the idea, as you say, that, you know, the
Kardashev
scale. I can't say that word properly. You know, the different types of civilizations, which are probably real, but you know, the idea that whatever it is going to be just taking energy, or perhaps taking mass from the actual star itself. That's a process known as star lifting.
Okay.
And if any of your viewers want to know more about that, there's a very, very good YouTube video all about the star lifting process, how it would work, you know, the different reasons you would do it. And basically what this means is they're sucking up the actual mass from it, and that might be hydrogen, which is obviously the primary source of a star. Secondary source is helium, and there are many other what they call rare metals, which would also be useful to take away and use, you know, on somebody's home planet, for instance.
So that would have to be on an unimaginable scale, wouldn't it, to actually take these elements out of a star and then to use them, these like say hydrogen, helium, this sort of stuff, and the rare metals.
Well, apparently it's not that difficult.
Really?
No, and I mean, you know, there have been a number of theories that have already been put forward on how it could be done, even by ourselves, if it ever came to that. So no, actually it's not that difficult. You know, it seems like it should be, but it's not. I mean, I'm not even going to try and go into how you could do it.
But once the technology is there, it's possible.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, and you know, there's a lot of theoretical physicists and theoretical engineers who are looking at these sort of ideas to do with star lifting, the so-called Dyson sphere or Dyson swarms, Dyson, you know, series, and even recently the Dyson rings. I mean, you know, there are many different theories of what could be. Sorry, okay. I mean, as to what's going on, I mean, there are many different theoretical physicists and engineers who are looking at these ideas now and seeing how we, as a species, could actually do this, perhaps with our own sun or a neighbouring sun. And of course, it's theoretical, but who knows what might be happening in 100 years' time. But then we get on to the more esoteric side of Tabby's star, because what I have discovered is that there are certain periodicities that have already been noted by Tabitha Boyajian and others in connection with the star, and these are either orbits of the star itself, or they relate to whatever it is that's in orbit around it. So in theory, they should be natural. However, when you look at them, they produce certain key numbers. Key numbers that are important to mathematical formula that we know here on Earth and have done for hundreds, if not thousands of years. We're talking, for instance, about Pascal's triangle, which is a way of creating very easily the Fibonacci sequence, which obviously is the fundamental, you know, structure of nature itself, of the growth of life within nature. But also it can be used for probability solving, it can be used for predictions, it can be used in many different ways, which I definitely do not understand, in mathematics. And the significance here is that in 2005, a French astronomer by the name of Luc Arnauld said that with all of these space missions going up there, like Kepler, wouldn't this be a great opportunity for an alien intelligence to communicate back with us in what he referred to as attention-seeking signals? And he suggested that these light fluxes could contain information to do with prime numbers, binary, or even produce geometrical shapes, which I don't think is probably quite right, because it's not as easy as that as far as the interpretation of these light dips. Well, here we have that. We've actually exactly got that. That's exactly what I was presenting in my lecture. But what's so significant is that these same numbers to do with Pascal's triangle crop up in association with the Great Pyramid, in particular the number 121. Which is something that my friend and colleague Robert Bouval is here lecturing about, all these strange coincidences of geometry and mathematics in association with the Great Pyramid. And he is coming to the conclusion that this information encoded within the Great Pyramid is not something that simply was known by the architect and just incorporated in for fun. That it's almost like a code that was, you might call, divinely inspired at the time, that was placed there for us to understand thousands and thousands of years later. In other words, it was almost the place that was chosen for this information to be passed down like a time capsule
Yeah.
through to the modern age. And only now, with the work of people like Robert, his co-author in his book, Chandra Wickman Singh, and other similar people, and myself. I mean, Robert's mind's work are converging perfectly at this time, and he believes that this information may be of alien origin. I think there's a good chance that that's the case as well.
Yeah, so Robert's talking along with Chandra that this like you say, a time capsule's been left here by whoever to unlock us to the mysteries of the universe,
Yes.
to explain our origins and who we are.
Yes.
And maybe now we're hitting a civilizational peak, let's say, or a technological peak, whereby, as you were saying, these guys are perhaps thinking, we can contact them now, we can get in touch with them. Is this what you think might be taking place?
It is, but of course there is a huge problem. And that's the fact that Tabis Star is 1,300 light years away from here. Now let's put this into perspective. Not only is that a long way away, but if you send, if let's say we confirm that this is an alien megastructure, and let's say that they are sending out some kind of broadcast, if we tried to respond to this, they'd receive the message 1,300 light years from now. Well, 1,300 years, so not light years. Although I think what's important here is to say that nothing, in theory, travels faster than light. I mean, not conventionally, not within physics, conventional physics at least, anyway. And of course, if they wanted to respond back to our hi, we've got your message, it's going to take another 1,300 years. So we're talking about 2,600 years round journeys here. So there's got to be a way of shortcutting this. And the answer is very simple: quantum entanglement.
Yes, absolutely.
Quantum entanglement is something which is at the fundamental root of a lot of weirdness within the quantum world, which is the subatomic world that exists beyond our physical universe. And in simple terms, this can be looked at in this way. That's that every particle has a twin. Don't ask me why, it has a twin. And those twins part, and even if they went to the furthest ends of the universe, if you tweaked one, the other one responds instantaneously.
One's up, the other one's down.
Yes.
Instantaneously.
Yeah.
Faster than light as well.
Yeah. Well, it's not just faster than light, it's in theory, from our perspective, instantaneous. Now, that's one particle. If you can imagine that we have not just trillions and trillions and trillions of particles within ourselves and within the environment around us, but if you can imagine that all these seas of particles are dancing the same dance within, say, my head, at least some of their twins could be in your head dancing the same dance. And if they are, then that's what we'd call telepathy. And that's instantaneous. But of course that opens up the possibility of things like remote viewing, the idea of seeing things afar, maybe through somebody else's eyes or through somebody, a memory stored from the past, or the future. Experiments have been done. Well, hold on, we're getting too far ahead of ourselves here, because the other important point is there's two things. Firstly, entanglement relates to consciousness.
Yes.
Because if you observe these experiments that are done with particles, it changes the outcome.
This is like the
split.
dual wave sort of particle split, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, essentially, without going into it in any detail, because nobody really understands what the hell's going on, is that that a particle can be a wave, in other words, an energy, until it's observed. And once it's observed, it becomes fixed as a particle and changes the outcome of an experiment.
This is it. This is the wave of probability that exists before you actually observe it. The
Like
moment you observe
Schrodinger's
it,
cat, whole
it
concept.
condenses and it becomes a particle in a particular...
It does. And so what this means, forget why, because nobody really understands. What this means is that consciousness has an effect upon particles existing in a subatomic world. The other factor that is important to all this is time, or I should say the lack of it, because on a subatomic level there is no time. I mean, time is essentially something of artificial construction. I mean, that doesn't mean that there's not cycles or loops of activity, but that's not time as in the passage of time that we see on a clock moving around from midnight to midnight, etc., etc. You know, we count, but we are an intelligent species that likes to count for some reason, and that's important to us. That doesn't happen on a subatomic level. So essentially, when these twin particles go off in different directions, there's no reason at all why one of them could not go off into the future and the other one could not go off into the past. And what this means is that telepathy can occur not just on the here and now, the present, but also in the future and in the past. And that means that some aspect of us could influence the past can influence us, the future can influence us. You know, in other words, we can almost draw on the future for information, whether it be to do with our own personal lives, connected with our own personal selves, or perhaps picking up information to do with future technologies and science and things like that, get insights into the future. And I mean, this might sound like very, you know, new agey, but there have been a number of experiments done by universities to show that the future can influence the past. I mean, for instance, they've set up experiments where people have tried to connect remote view and change instrumentation that's planted somewhere that nobody's actually looking at, but they're deliberately doing it in the past. You know, in other words, that the experiment is like done partly in the past, partly in a future situation. Yeah. They're trying to change the the readings of instrumentation. Nobody's looking at it. Nobody's looking at it at all. And then when obviously they go to that box and they look at it, sure enough, it's all changed. Now, all right, you know, that there's pedantics could come into it and say, well, you know, you might be thinking you're influencing the past, but you know, maybe you're influencing the present. But quite clearly, these are time logged as well. So you say, no, actually, look, the time log suggests all these changes occurred, you know, actually at this time, the time that we were mentally focusing on. And these are scientific experiments that have been written up as reports and papers that you can find online.
Absolutely. So, as we're talking about this then, and if it is a alien race that is some way trying to make contact with us, surely they wouldn't need to show us via the star. If we're all quantumly entangled, is there not, and this consciousness is fundamental, is it not possible that they can, I guess they're preparing us for that conscious connection, that instantaneous consciousness?
Yes,
quantumly
absolutely. But going back to the Tabby star, the answer to the communication is quantum entanglement. Now, whether we do that through our mind or through some other process remains to be seen. At the moment, the most obvious thing is to connect with them through the mind and say, we are here, yes, we've got your message, give us another sign. Now, all right, in theory, in the physical universe, if they give us a sign, it's going to take 1300 years for that to kick in. But here's the good thing, because of entanglement working across time, what that tells us is that they could send a message not just to the present day, but also the past, any point in the past. So they could have influenced the mind of the architect of the Great Pyramid to encode that response.
Could they have encoded the response within Tabby's star 1300 years ago, so we pick it up now at the right time?
But why 1300 years ago? Because, I mean, 1300 years ago we were in the Dark Ages, certainly in Britain. Obviously the Maya civilization was at its height. I mean, obviously there are various other civilizations around, you know, Indian, Vedic civilizations, China, etc., etc. But I mean, maybe we should look closer at what was going on 1300 years ago. I think that's probably a good thing to look at. But all of these things tell us that something big is going on. Yeah. Now, okay, it could well be that with all these telescopes looking at Tabby star right now, they could come back and say, mystery solved, and we can scrub this interview and go on with our lives and do something else, which is what I do generally anyway, talking about ancient civilizations. But I have a feeling that this is going to build and build, because with so many telescopes and so many minds focused on one spot in the sky in a manner which has never ever been done before, that tells us something. And it also gives the opportunity for an alien intelligence to use this to their advantage.
Do you think now is the time? Do you think we're ready? Do you think this is what's going to take place in the next sort of 50 years maybe?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
so we're on the precipice of one of the most amazing periods of human history.
Absolutely.
If this is the case.
But this, through entanglement, this works through mass consciousness. The more people that know about this, the more likely it is to happen.
So this is important.
This is crucial to the future of humanity. As Mikko Kaku said, you know, the well-known physicist, I mean, he said that the discovery of Tabby's star was the most important discovery in the last 500 years since the discovery by Columbus of the Americas. That's what he said. And we're going to have to rewrite all of our books to accommodate this discovery. That's what he said in October 2015 when all this was first announced.
So truly on the precipice of a brave new world.
I'd like to think so.
Andrew Collins, thanks very much for speaking to us, my friend. That was absolutely fascinating. We'll see what happens here in the future, I guess, and if this is the moment where finally contact happens and maybe contact in the desert for us as well. That's an incredible story as well. Thanks for speaking to us, my friend.
My pleasure.
You can hear more interviews like this on heaventoearth.com, of course. Stay tuned and we'll bring you some more fantastic interviews.